Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan NSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 7th of February 2024. Um, Depending on what part of the world you're in, actually, right now, it's not the 7th, it is the 8th. So, hey-o. Anyway, I am somewhere in Ukraine right now, and I've not had the greatest grasp as to what has been going on the front lines over the last couple of days due to being in transit and having an awful lot to do in Ukraine. It's been a fabulous experience so far. I've even got, hey, if you were uh, in the business of being interested, I've got a couple of awesome patches from Rick the Ukrainian. What a legend! So that's really cool. And I got a beautiful gift from the Great Fish, who is a soldier, and he has given me carved out of a 152mm Soviet shell with Ukraine in my heart. It says on a map of Ukraine on that side. Oh, on that side, sorry. And on the other side, it says to Johnny Pierce. It's got the Ukrainian um, trident, and it says from fish there. So that is absolutely fabulous. Really, really appreciate that. So it's been a lovely day in who I've met and the friends that I have increased my relationship with, such as Zhenya and Greg, and indeed Pierre as well. Anyway, let's go to where we normally start. Before that, though, let's remind you of what the map means. If you haven't used my mapping before, here is the key. There's been quite a few changes, but these have taken place over a couple of days, so bear that in mind. This JR, thank you so much for doing the mapping. He has done this a couple of days in a row, but I wasn't able to do it yesterday. We can see that although there's lots of activity on the front lines, there haven't been any significant changes to the northeastern sector. It's worth mentioning that there are lots of rumours about a build-up of troops in the areas to the north of the border, whether that be around Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv. Lots of talk about deep reconnaissance groups pouring over the borders and or not pouring over the borders, but striking and being very active and using FPV drones and also hitting with artillery. Indeed, here we have, actually, it's not here, it is this one. So Astrai Intel saying Russia has amassed 500 tanks and over 600 armored vehicles, several hundred howitzers, and 40,000 soldiers for an attack on Kupiansk. I understand we all have a lot of things to say about it, but the enemy is making a mistake. Let's not interrupt them. Well, okay, considering this, I would say that there is a possibility they are going to strike from the north, but I'm not sure it would be a clever idea. It could just be that these troops are in transit. Actually, they aren't there for attacking purposes, or they could be there to try and get the Ukrainians to move resources from elsewhere to place them along the northern front line. So it could be a bit of a game of sort of cat and mouse about where to place your troops. So I'm not 100% sure that those troops will be posing a genuine threat up there, but they are actually doing things and they are striking at the moment. It's whether they're going to have a large maneuver or not. But it is certainly very testy right along that northern border. And when we come to the Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front line, no changes until we get down to this Kreminna area to the west of Kreminna on the way to Yembolivka and Terny, where all the mappers indicate some changes, although Deep State Map has rejigged the mapping a little bit here. It's interesting with deep state maps because sometimes recently I thought that they've aligned themselves with Syriac maps quite on a number of occasions quite quickly, and have had to rejig their maps when other information has come out, rather than Andrew Perpetua being a little bit more conservative and only changing the mapping when they definitely know. I get that sense that deep state map is sometimes quick on changing it in favor of the Russians, but it isn't always the case, or it's not always as far as they have said. So there's a bit of rejig there for the light yellow, but mainly the Russians have made gains, as according to Syriac maps, indeed deep state map in that area, and Andrew Perpetua as well. So some worrying gains for the Ukrainians as they move towards that. The water features of the Zherebets River here and they are very close to both Yampolivka and indeed Terny to the north, and is somewhere to watch out for. Now we're going to go to Bilahorivka here. There are no changes to the map. There's been something mentioned here, an unfortunate story from Bilahorivka, where a Ukrainian unit was caught in a surprise attack yesterday. The last remaining serviceman requested direct artillery fire on himself, but this couldn't be done due to lack of ammunition. And it's not the first story we've heard about effects of the lack of ammunition along the front line. It's why I am just incandescent with rage about what is going on in US Congress at the moment, and it just seems to be continuing. There is no end to it, and it seems a very explicit attempt to stop aid getting to Ukraine. I'm really genuinely worried about the state of affairs when you've got Tucker Carlson going to Russia and spreading outright nonsense and lies, when you've got that finding fertile ground in some areas of the US electorate, and you have lawmakers seemingly purposefully ruining Ukraine's chances of prevailing in this war and causing the death of countless people. It's just it beggars belief. Anyway, this account says a disappointing story from Bilahorivka, which took place yesterday in the industrial area. In the first half of the day, it's not clear from where. One of the positions in the area was entered by the enemy section after either through an underground mine or something else. It's not clear. Contact with the enemy was at a distance of 5 to 10 meters. All this happened under rubble, so the whole picture was not immediately visible from the drone. As a result of the battle, one of our soldiers remained alive, who, with tears in his eyes after the deaths of all his comrades, called for fire from a M777 on himself. That is, one person was already ready to say goodbye to life, but there was no fire support because there are no shells. As a result of the battle, the position is lost. In fact, the industrial zone is in the grey zone now, and the fighter who called the fire on himself survived by some miracle of the 300th. Appears not for betrayal, but for understanding how our boys fight. That is not a good news story from Bilahorivka, and these kinds of accounts appear to not exactly like that, but the story of not being able to do X or Y because of a lack of ammunition is a widespread state of affairs. Right, then we're going to come on down to, before we get to Avdiivka, Bakhmut. Before we get to Avdiivka, we'll drop in on Bakhmut, where we see a few gains here, but all possibly rejigs for Andriy Perpetua around Bodanivka. So this is one of those rare areas along the front line at the moment where the Ukrainians seem to be doing a pretty good job of repelling the Russians and pushing them back. But also some changes around here, which is the trench area to the northwest of Klishchivka. And I find this very interesting because we had seen Suriyat maps claim that the Russians had taken control of the entire trench network, which is the entire, again, point of this whole area. Klishchivka itself is just rubbled houses, and this high ground that sits to the west of Klishchivka offers obviously good visuals over the settlement, and on this high ground there's this extensive trench network that, as I say, Suriyat map says was initially controlled or taken over by the Russians, but that didn't seem to be the case at all at that point. And the other mappers, Deep State Map and Andriy Perpetua, have consistently said that no, half of it's controlled. In fact, Deep State Maps moved theirs back recently, and now Andriy Perpetua's shrunken the Russian control even further to the point where it doesn't look like they really control any of the trench line at all. It's either all grey zone or the Ukrainians have some control of it in parts. And this goes completely against what Suriyat Maps has said. And I do wonder whether they'll do a classic Suriyat Maps rejig and walk it back with a kind of tail between their legs, but not really, because they don't really admit that they made a mistake. But there you go. That is good news for the Ukrainians there. Now, where it's bad news is around Avdiivka. It is looking incredibly precarious, and by precarious, I think it's kind of game over for Avdiivka. To the north, just extensive gains, as you can see from all of the mappers here, showing that the Russians are now in the main part of the town, really to the north. It is, very worrying there. Coke plant still seems to be holding out fairly well. No changes there for an awful long time, but all around this quarry reservoir, the Russians are making huge gains. And then in the Tsarska Hota area, Andrew Pepech has now changed the mapping to show Russian control over that restaurant area and part of the dachas to the north. I think this has been really dynamic. I think it has been backwards and forwards. So I'm not sure that Surrey Maps or Deep State Map has been correct here. I trust Andrew Pepech in that area, and I think it has been that has been retaken by the Ukrainians and then lost again by the looks of it there. And some gains for the Ukrainians around the Zenith area here. The nuclear bunker, very strong, very robust stronghold for the Ukrainians that Syriac maps claimed that the Russians had taken, but I think the geolocation was faulty, and I think it was not the case at all. And they have slowly, over the last sort of week or so, walked back those control claims, not hugely, just little chunks here and there, as more confirmatory evidence comes out, or disconfirmatory evidence, and some gains over towards Opitny to the north of Opitny, as according to Surrey maps. Andrew Pepech has some gains around the Pervomaisky area. That means all the mappers are pretty much in alignment with each other in Russians gaining there. So this is not a happy area for the Ukrainians at all at the moment. That one gain there, I think, is more a case of rejigging than any kind of Ukrainian counterattack. When we go to look at some of the other sources, we can say the situation in southern Avdiivka is too messy to be mapped. Ukrainian forces have recaptured the Tsarska Hota restaurants. This is Ukrainian forces recapturing it, but this is from a couple of days ago now. And Russians to the north are virtually encircled and without heavy equipment. A Russian attempt to reinforce them earlier ended in failure. But that's like looking a bit more positively on what Ukrainians have been doing there. But then other sources are saying, yeah, it's not looking good. Russian advances in Avdiivka, says Yaroslav Trofimov, which increasingly looks likely to become the first Ukrainian city to fall since the capture of Bakhmut last May. Are the direct result of acute ammunition shortage caused by the US Congress withholding further military aid to Ukraine. I mean, it's very clear for many people that where the blame lies here, and of course, people will be arguing in America whether that's the Republicans or the Democrats' fault, but it doesn't look like those key Republicans actually want aid to Ukraine at all. There's no desire for them to do that. There is desire from the Democrats, and I think it tells you where the blame should lie. Russian troops have advanced in the built-up area of Avdiivka. Street battles are taking place. Situation's critical. It's just not looking good at all there. So that's actually a source I showed you the other day, but just being retold here and discussed by others. It's just, not looking good in that neck of the woods. And in fact, this is one from this evening saying Avdiivka is being battered right now with 1.5-ton bombs. These are FAB 1500, not the FAB 250, not the FAB 500. These are huge bombs being filmed from Donetsk, which allegedly saw 8 years of bombing. That's what the Russians claim, that had 8 years of bombing, and yet Donetsk is full of light and intact buildings. The whole narrative is how terrible the Ukrainians are because they've been bombing Donetsk for 8 years. And then you actually compare Donetsk to Avdiivka and tell me who's been doing most of the bombing and how seriously that bombing has been carried out. Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter in Ukraine, who's not fighting at the moment but is helping out. The only real hotspot right now is Avdiivka. He says the Russians have put most of their resources here, and thanks to the weather, fog, they've been able to get into the northern parts of the city. The fog has kept our drone operators on the ground for a few days now. So our Russians have not engaged in urban combat but are waiting for an attack vector from the south. What is negative for us is the time required for action when the Russians launch the attacks. Since we are dependent on the drone weapon, we have plenty of time to react to the Russians' attacks over open ground. Normally, we see them coming long before they even reach our positions. An attack in an urban environment takes only a few minutes to launch, so we can't depend on drones. And on open ground, we have one 1 to 20 in eliminated manpower. In urban environment, we're talking at 1 to 1. Our commanders have to decide whether we have reached a point where we have made the enemy bleed the most, and we can retreat slowly but surely to save the lives of our soldiers. I was talking about this today in the car with the others, and that seems to be, from what Greg's been hearing from this area, that seems to be what will take place, a kind of operational withdrawal that will try and trick the Russians as much as possible. He says, I do not want to see another Bakhmut where we lose lots of soldiers' lives to no avail. Actually, I don't think it was to no avail in Bakhmut. I disagree with that. When ours withdrew from Bakhmut, they were able to establish more robust defences and stop the Russians from advancing further. Well, yeah, that was the point. Now the Russians are stopped for the moment, but we do not have the resources to drive them back from the northern part. There you go. He goes on to talk about other things, but that's generally the picture there, not looking good. And then we come down to north of Marinka area here, where it's challenging for the Ukrainians as well. Yeah, some lost ground there and lost ground here to the Russians, as according to Surat maps and deep state maps around Novomykolivka, and this is now very, very close, and if not inside western reaches of Novomykolivka. So that would be very worrying. In fact, I should probably go to Surat map sources or the source itself to see what they have to say about there. Here we have what they say their own map of the area, showing that the following intense bombardment, the Russian army has restarted the assault on Novomykolivka and managed to re-enter the eastern part of the locality. Still premature to say that the final battle for the village has begun, as the Ukrainian situation in the area is not so compromised, as the encirclement of Novomykolivka is not yet well developed. We'll see how that turns out, but certainly some pretty doom and gloom predictions there from Surat maps concerning that neck of the woods. And then when we come out, we can also see some gains in the Mikilska area, just on the way to Vuhledar from the southeast. Not somewhere where we've seen much movement for quite a long time, really. Just trying to see if there was any mention of this in any of their tweets, but I don't think there is. I've got to go back a couple of days. It's been a long time. No, nothing mentioned there. So this is just a change to their mapping that has been unannounced. Yeah, I can't see that anywhere. So interesting. JL's picked up on that one. And then when we look to the rest of the front line, there's nothing along the Zaporizhia area. And then as we come to Krenki, this is fairly significant here. So Deep State Map has some readjustment, some gains further to the, I guess, southwest of Krenki, with Deep State Map moving it a fair bit, although some rejigging in favour of Russia in other areas and then in favour of Ukraine in another area. So it's a real mixed bag of nuts. And on the other hand, Andrew Perpetua has some gains for Ukraine in the northeast of Krenki. So this is the first change I've seen around Krenki for an awful long time. And it's fairly good for the Ukrainians because it suggests that there's been a broadening of that foothold. Yeah, I'd need to look into the details of that, but I hadn't had a chance to look at ISW or any other sources. So just I apologize for that. Yeah, it's really mainly about Avdiivka. It looks very, very dodgy there for the Ukrainians, but good news that Krenki could be broadening after an awful long time. So I don't know why that would be happening. Yeah, watch out for that one. Anyway, really appreciate your support. Please take care. Speak to you soon.